Hey, thank you so much for joining into Other Things with David Parker. And I am so excited to have David as a guest today. If you've watched previous episodes, you've heard his name come up a number of times. And so I thought, well, it's time to put a face to the name and to this amazing man. But David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Kenny. Really appreciate it.
I tell you, the way I know David has been a lifetime mentor to my son. And I shared when we interviewed Chris Clayton that David was the associate pastor for worship at 121 Community Church. And my son started attending there as a teenager because we were doing a ministry plant. We wanted him to be involved where he could have activities with other kids. But David opened his life to Colton and his heart and taught him a massive amount about everything from being a worship pastor to a songwriter to engineering, audio recording. So David is a man of many hats. But I asked people, how would you like to be introduced on the show? And I think it's cool what David sent me. He said, David Parker, follower of Christ, husband, dad, and owner of a great dog. So, the first question is, tell us about this great dog.
Oh, he's just a mutt, but he's always in your face and loving on you. So it's always fun to come home. And he thinks I've been gone for 7 years, and I've been gone for 7 minutes. So that's a good dog in my opinion.
Now, he's just a
mutt, just a mutt.
Well, you got lucky. I tell you, the mutts we've had were dogs with mental illness. I'm serious. They were. It never worked out for us, but. So, David, you're in a new phase of life, and you talked about this. Of course, I know this, but share with us what God is doing in your life right now.
Well, we've been in a church for 22 years, and we left just because we felt like God was moving us on from the current vision that they've got going. And so my wife Diane and I are just starting a whole new chapter. And we're really just turning a page and seeing what God has for us. We don't really have anything set and specific. We weren't moving towards something. We weren't really expecting to leave. It was just something that God really called us to. He may have been subtly planting seeds for us to move, but we weren't quite ready. And I finally looked at Diane and I said, we're too content. We're just too content. This is we could stay here and it would be fine. But I said, I've always lived on the edge and pushed it and pushed pressing into God, and I quit doing that. I got lazy. And so we just took a giant step of faith. I'm talking into nothing except for the Lord and his hands, his provision. And it's been a rough road since we left. I could tell you the litany of stories of things that have happened, but we've turned a corner, and now I feel like the journey is it's like the plane is about to take off. And we're on the taxiway, and we're getting ready to hit the engines forward. And I can't even tell you how excited I am about what's next.
Well, and I can testify because I've known David for 20 years, and my kid has been intimately involved with you, David. And so I know for you to make this advance in your life is definitely a word from the Lord. So I'm excited for you. And I tell you, you're extremely gifted and talented. That's a fact. And so I'm excited to see where God takes you. And I appreciate what you're doing because I do know this about you. And David was instrumental at the last church he served in doing amazing things with the music ministry there. And my son had the opportunity to work with David on a construction of a state-of-the-art recording studio, designed with Apple. What are they called? Apple Studios out of London.
Oh no, it would be Abbey Road.
Oh yeah, that's right. I'm sorry, Apple was the Beatles label, but Abbey Road was the studios where they recorded. So an amazing place, and when it was built, the best acoustics in the United States. So very prolific background in a multitude of things. But so you're in transition. Tell me a little bit about your calling. From when you were, first in the ministry. Have you always been in the past a worship pastor, worship leader, musician? I know you had Soundtown Studios, which that came up in both conversation with Will Denton and Chris Clayton, and so there may be some stories there that you want to share. But tell me just your background, because I know your mom and dad. I mean, they were there in the church, or at least I would see them there. But I really don't know how you progressed to this point. So if you could just kind of give us a little bit of a travel log of your life and some key points that have brought you to this place where you are today.
Sure. When I was 18, I really sensed a call of God into music ministry. It was real specific. It was music ministry. And at the time I was attending a traditional church, which my dad was a pastor for 50 years. So I've been in church since I was right out of the womb. And but at 18, I felt that call. And at the time, being a part of a traditional church, I thought it was going to be the guy waving the 1, 2, 3, 4 up at the pulpit. But it wasn't long after that, a friend of mine and I did a talent show at another church. And because of that talent show, we ended up leading worship for a vacation Bible school. And we went in that first day at that vacation Bible school, and we absolutely fell totally flat. It was terrible. And we just sat back and revamped our thoughts and said, how do we just pull these kids in? And we just kind of went nuts the next day. And it was the most amazing just juxtaposition of the first day to the second day, how things changed. And I said, this is something special. And we just continued it on. And later on, that youth pastor that invited us to be a part of that talent show invited me to be the worship leader for the student ministry there. It's in Houston, Texas. And they had a huge student ministry. I'm talking like 600 kids. And so there was a guy there who mentored me and just helped me learn how to get in front of people, how to engage students, how to love students off the stage and on the stage. And that started a whole process of learning how to be a different kind of worship leader, what I would say is more of a contemporary worship leader. And then from that church was where another guy named Al Denson was he was kind of on the cutting edge of when worship was making that transition from all hymns to choruses. And then now we're getting into choruses and new worship songs. And I was able to be under his ministry for a little while and learned from him and toured with him in 1994 on the tour he was on. And then through that began to do a whole lot of other things, in addition to the fact that I was going to Texas A&M at the time, and I was leading worship at what was then called the Baptist Student Union, which is now, I think, the Baptist Student Ministry. And every Wednesday we would do these big lunches where churches would come in and bring food in for the students, and we'd all eat because, we were all poor, so we all needed to eat. But what was neat was these churches were just little churches right around the College Station, Bryan area. And I would lead worship for a lot of those Wednesdays. And then they would invite me to come out and do these weekends with their students. And I used to get I had a Nissan 240 SX. Now, if you know what that is, it's a 2-door car. It's a little car. I used to pack a PA, a guitar, a keyboard. I mean, the only thing that could fit in there was me and all my junk. And I would drive to these little places, pull up in that 240, and I'd pull all that stuff out and set it up. And we would have just these incredible weekends. And God just continued to grow that and grow that and grow that, and ended up going all over the country leading worship for student ministries, for student events, for Hot Hearts, Texas, and all over. Just really got the benefit of that part. And also got involved with student life camps, which at that time they were just kicking off, and they were the cutting edge camp going on for students. There was nothing else that even came close to what they were doing, and led worship for a lot of those, which led to other things. And it just kept going and going and going. And I was just privileged to be a part of a lot of those kind of student events. But eventually, well, let me say this. Also in 1994, I started my own recording studio because I'd done a record up in Nashville with a guy named Brian Green, which sadly passed during COVID. But just a phenomenal. He was music. I think he's recently was a music director for Stephen Curtis Chapman. But just a phenomenal piano player, producer, and he really took me under his wing. And he's kind of like, he's like, why am I working with this kid? He's not really doesn't know what he's green, didn't know what he's doing, but he did. And he took care of me. And I realized that's where I kind of got my idea of, hey, I can do this recording thing. I mean, I like how this works. I understand it. And so I started doing a little bit of my own recording during that time. with the old ADAT machines. If anybody knows who those are, those of you who are young have no idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, we used to record on Super VHS tapes, which you probably don't even know what that is. But anyway, that's what we did. And slowly over time, I just began to realize, number one, I did not want to be what at the time what would be called a Christian artist. I realized that was not for me. I learned that through Student Life Camp because they allowed me to be the feature artist while some other person led the worship. And I really felt more like I wanted to be in the worship seat, not the concert artist seat. And that's just me. It's not that it's a bad thing. I felt better leading people into an opportunity to encounter God. And that's a big deal for me when it comes to worship. It's not just an experience, because we can go to a movie, you can see something online that makes you cry or laugh, and it's briefly here and gone. But an encounter with God, it absolutely changes your course from where you're going. And that's what we've just recently done, is we've had an encounter with God that said, you're going to change your course, and I'm going to take you on a different direction than only I can lead you in, and you have to trust me to do it. And so I got to that point from traveling where I had our first son, Noah, and I didn't want to be the absentee dad because I was traveling all the time. And so how God works, the recording studio began to become more prolific. And what was cool was all the people that came to the recording studio knew that I was a worship leader. And so all the worship leaders, or a lot of them around this area, and there was a lot of the cutting edge guys, they came because they knew I was a worship leader, not because I was some super talent. But what it became just a central hub of worship leaders, guys and gals, just talking about what it meant to be on the road, what it meant to lead people in worship, and how we were growing, and what it's like to be on an island. How do we come together? How do we help each other? And it really became a constant companionship of helping each other grow, helping each other's ministries, going through psychology together, just talking to each other, being counseling one another through difficult times. And God just kind of slowly let the road fall off, and the studio began to pick up. And then as I was doing an album for one of our worship leaders, he told me about 121 Community Church there in Dallas. And it was a little church. I remember walking in going, there's 50 people. I go, I love this. This is awesome. There's 50 people here. I can just sit here and nobody's asking anything of me. And then not too long after that, I got asked to guest lead there and led for their first Sunday of doing 2 services, and they were all pumped, and I was pumped, and we just had an incredible time, and then slowly began to do that more. And then finally, the studio, being in Dallas-Fort Worth, the market's just not the same. And it was right when, like, I had invested in a ton of money into studio gear, like you would have probably more up in Nashville. But that's when all the new computer stuff was starting to come out. So all these kids were starting to do stuff in their dorm rooms and stuff like that. And they were doing great music. And, it's not the same, but it was still good enough. And so I realized, okay, it's time to quit working 18 hours and not making any money, and just close that down, and then begin to lead worship at 121, and then led there for 22 years. And then had the privilege to design and build the church and the studio. I didn't design the studio. That was Kevin Hughes, who is a phenomenal studio designer, just built an amazing room. And so I was able to use the talents that I'd learned from doing Soundtown for, 15 plus years, to be able to record for the church. And that's where Colton and I, both in production, live production, and in recording production, just had a ball together. I just felt like he was my creative partner. There's so many moments that I'll never forget with him. But leading at 121 until we could reach this point now where we left, and now we're off to the next chapter.
Well, I tell you, I can still remember the first day in the new worship center, and David had just gone all out. Like I said, the acoustics were amazing. They had these big bass traps under the stairs, the risers. And I can still remember you started off with this video, and it was kind of rocking along, and all of a sudden it had this, I don't know if it was something slamming or whatever, but the
bass drop.
The bass drop went wham. And I mean, it hit my chest physically. And at that point, of course, it was a cool church in that regard. People didn't, it wasn't like some of the old fashioned churches. And so everybody looked around like, okay, we're going somewhere now, I mean, and yeah, it was a blast, and you allowing my kid to be a part of that. But I have to ask you, me being an audiophile nut, that at Soundtown, did you have analog gear back then, as far as like the tube amps or whatever? What were you running there?
Yeah, we were running preamps from Manley to API, and we had a ton of stuff. I mean, it was top notch stuff. It's tried and true analog recording. And so we had Tube Tech compressors. We had a whole rack full of stuff. I ended up selling all that because, like I said, all these new things were coming out. But when we started this church studio, I had really fallen in love with the Neve 1073s, and I was able to get my hands on an original, not the newer version. I'm talking the original. And man, we just loaded that sucker down with the best stuff that we possibly could. Got the best mics we could, because there's still not, and this is just my opinion, there's nothing better than just really miking something well and having a great performance. Those are the two things you got to have. I mean, there's so many bells and whistles now, you can do what you want, but there's something special to a person singing or playing an instrument, miking it perfectly with the best sounding gear possible, and capturing it in the highest fidelity possible and putting all that together.
Wow. So, now looking back, if you had all that gear, it'd be worth several $100,000 probably, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, it was then. So I've actually,
yeah.
when I left the church, I still had some gear from Soundtown, and I can actually say that I purchased what is now vintage mics. That's how old I am, Kenny. I've got mics that are 20 years old because I bought them 20 years ago.
But I tell you what, watching Apple Studio, Rick Beato, whom I follow on YouTube, musicologist, they gave him a personal tour, of the actual large room, and that guy was talking, and he had out some of the mics from like the 60s and the 50s,
Yes.
and man, amazing. They said Kurt Cobain. I was watching Butch Vig, the interview with Beato, and talking about in the recording studio. I don't know what level of mic it was, but I think he blew out 3 mics, destroyed them because he sang so loud. So amazing. But
I had a girl, one of the girl worship leaders who was just phenomenal, Jamie Smith. She almost blew out one of my capsules with her voice. She was so strong. She was amazing.
Well, you mentioned something there, David, and I've talked to Colton about this. But if I understand you correctly, you're saying that Soundtown became kind of a central hub, kind of an enclave. Is that what I'm understanding?
Right. Definitely for the Texas worship leaders. And at that time, there were a lot of Texas worship leaders leading all across the country. And so it was the place where we all gathered. That's one of the reasons when Diana and I got married, we moved to Dallas-Fort Worth, because it was central to the country. So we could go East Coast, West Coast, and it wasn't a big deal. But what it really became, because a lot of the guys and gals were coming from basically the Dallas-Fort Worth area or close by, and they would come by the studio and either record one song or record an album, all kinds of different things. Or we would do a mix for somebody or that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Well, with Colton getting started here in Nashville, something that just encouraging him, praying for him, that I think that's from outside looking in. And I know that they have like the writers' retreats here, and the record labels will sponsor that type of thing. And there's some camaraderie, but, watching the Sound City documentary by Dave Grohl, and I mentioned this before on air, but I think it's important because it has purpose beyond us talking about the recording industry or music. But what Sound City was at its heyday was what you're talking about. A communication central, a central hub for artists. Mm-hmm. And so this synergy that existed was powerful. And I think we're missing that a lot, in not just in the musical realm, but in life in general. But what's your feedback on that? Do you see perhaps you being involved in something synergistic like that in the future? I mean, is any God saying anything? I'm not trying to impose that. I'm just saying, but you've been good at it. And so what's your take? I mean, as far as in your experience, as far as this idea of the central hub of an enclave?
Well, I think it's I don't know what God has for the future. I know on another level, just coming from a really large church, we've reevaluated kind of what we want in a church as we move forward, and not saying that as a consumer, just saying it as a follower of Christ. I really long for something much smaller, where we can really get into people's lives and they can get into our lives. And that's kind of the way it was at the studio, because there was just a small group of people who were doing things, and we would just keep passing each other in the studio and having these wonderful conversations. And it was a constant encouragement, because a lot of us felt like island when you're out in a hotel. Like for me, I traveled by myself for a long time before we had a band, and I mean, it was lonely. It was really lonely. But you come to the studio and everybody's hanging out, and we're there till midnight recording, and boy, you hit that one great song, and it's just magic. And those moments are just cherished and always will be in my heart. And I'm still talking to all these guys and girls today. We've not lost those friendships. Like you pick up right where you left off. And that is something really, really special that I will cherish forever.
Yeah, and I think we have this old gas station here in Spring Hill that's on Highway 31, which has been a main street for like 100 plus years. But this old gas station has been converted into a cigar shop and where they go to smoke. And I sit there and watch these guys, and it's a cool little building, and it's right on the main drag. And they have out back, they built this covered porch, and they have all the gear out there, and you see these cats sitting out there in these really cool looking leather chairs, and they're smoking stogies. And I thought, I don't want to smoke stogies, but I tell you, there's something about that. You see that ambiance, and you go like, maybe I want to go sit in there and just see what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think the people are longing for it. And there's a Hatchet House, and it's on the back side of a strip center, just 5 minutes from my house. And I was cutting through, kind of the parking lot at night, the pizza place, doing a pickup for our home here. I wasn't delivering, but then all of a sudden there's this activity. There's all these people. I thought, well, whoa, what's this? So I stopped, and especially being, in love with people, concerned about people, I thought, wait, why are they all gathering here? And so come to find out, it's one of these, activity places where you throw a hatchet. So that's on my list of places to go, get another friend and just go sit and hang out and see what's happening in people's lives. But that's encouraging. In conversation prior to, I sent you a questionnaire that asked you about some things that you sense in your life. And one of the top things that you shared with me is just a sense of absolute trust in God in every circumstance and situation in life. And I think that's important. In this time of transition, you mentioned if you feel led to share some things about, you said it's been a little bit rocky. If there's anything you think you want to share about that, I think to help people understand how to transition, when we go into these major transitions in life.
Yeah, I really do think it's a consistent daily pressing into the Lord, even when the worst things happen. I mean, literally, I kid you not, since we left 121, we've had 1, 2, 3, I think 3 people pass in our family. And we wouldn't have been able, actually 4, I'm sorry, 4, Dinah just corrected me. All this happened in the span of 6 months. And we've just been able to spend time with family like we weren't able to before, because to be honest, ministry will eat you alive if you let it. It just will, because someone always needs something. And when you're on staff at a church, you're kind of supposed to be the people that are there, but sometimes you just got to learn to say no and let somebody else carry that burden for a while. And we weren't doing that very well. And we've spent more time with our boys, with my son's wife, with our family, and it's just been a rallying around of that. I even got my truck stolen during this time. Unbelievable. But what happened was, and we were depending on our truck to move. And so what was crazy was that truck being stolen turned into this whole rethinking of life, going, well, what if we do this? What if we do this? And that's how we're ending up we're going to live in a fifth wheel. And I got a new truck that was better than my old truck. And that's just precedent. I mean, it would not have happened if that truck got stolen. I was mad. And then I'm like, And then God does all this stuff, and you're like, I don't know how this happens other than God himself, because there's no way I would have seen it.
Oh man, I tell you, I'm envious of you. And well, I mean, no, not about the tragedies that have happened, and it's pressure. And dear friend of mine, I've been friends with since I was a teenager. Here just in the past couple of years, or actually probably the last year, had the same situation happen, and a very difficult time. I mean, even for those of us who believe in Jesus Christ and believe that if you know him, you're going to spend eternity in heaven. It still doesn't make the passing of loved ones any easier.
No.
And I tell you, I'll be praying for you. And, when my father passed, I'm such a pragmatist, believe the Bible. I thought I was going to be okay with it. And 6 months later, it was during Christmas time, and we had this huge event for children. We had hundreds of kids at our big meeting center there at the church. And I was on staff at a mission staff, but head of all the community ministry. And in that night, I just started breaking down crying. And my assistant was there, and I had to step away. And I said, Lynn, I don't know what's going on. I mean, I'm just weeping uncontrollably. And she looked at me, she said, Kenny, you've never stopped to grieve. And I thought I was good, because my father, who had not been a Christian his entire life, came to Christ at the very end of his life. So I was rejoicing, but still when it hits, it's just, you can't stop it. So it's the reality, and we need to go through it. It's part of life.
Right.
But so something else you said is to follow the greatest commandment of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. And how does that play out in your personal life, in your daily living? What are you seeing God doing with that?
One of the things we've done, there's a small town next to where we live called Roanoke, Texas, and it's known as the unique dining capital of the world, because there are some unique restaurants there. But there are basically 3 restaurants that we've been frequenting on purpose, and we've gotten to know the entire staff of all 3 restaurants, and we know the waiters and waitresses by name, and that's on purpose as well. And because we found out, as being on church staff, you don't run in, at least especially in the worship team, you don't run into folks that are not followers of Christ, or are seeking him out very often. It's just not a common occurrence. You have to be super intentional about it. And when we started that kind of deal of meeting these people and finding out their names, there's just something about calling a person by their name, especially when you go back and you remember their name and they're like, you remember who I was. And I mean, it's been phenomenal to see God work in the lives of these folks, who some of them have some pretty hard and tragic stories. But we've gone to dinner now with some of them. Just yesterday, we went by one. It's a kind of a home cooking restaurant. We set them up with a graphic designer and a sign painter, and she was painting their new graphics on the side of their building. And that's how involved that we've gotten in these folks' lives. And we talked to the manager of one of the restaurants and said, hey, if we did a house church, would you come? She goes, I would absolutely come to a house church with you guys. So I'm just telling you, you got to go out there, and that's how we're doing it, because it's one way we know how. It's people we've never met before. But we've walked through one of the guys, his wife passed away, and we went and helped him do the funeral. A couple lost their unborn baby, and we walked through that with them. I mean, it doesn't take long for God to begin to use you when you're willing to be a tool used by him to love people into the kingdom. And I'm getting chill bumps just thinking about it right now. I feel like I'm in it, man. I feel like I'm rubbing shoulders with the way Jesus did it, because he was with everybody and he loved them. And this is exciting. This is an exciting time for me.
Hey, that's cool. I tell you, because people are open, and I've had conversations with people that have been in the ministry for a long time, and they'll ask me like, well, like, where are you seeing this? But it's just like what you're saying, to where you open your mouth, you show love and concern. I tell you, I had a friend come in to visit me when I was still living in Texas, and we met at the church I had ministered in Greenwood, Arkansas. And I was so excited to see him. I was really drilling down because I don't get to see him in person very often. This was before Google Meets. And we're at a restaurant and we're talking. And finally he said, Kenny, he said, you haven't even paid attention to the waiter. I said, what? He said, you're acting like he doesn't exist. And I said, well, I'm just, excited to see you. And he goes, well, no. He said, you need to give him some FaceTime. He said, he's got a hard job. And that always stuck with me because I was so focused in on being with this person that I don't get to see very often, but he's sitting there evaluating me and it's calling me out, that I wasn't being, connected. And so that's awesome. It's everywhere you turn. And I tell you, before we left Texas, there was, we were at the Cotton Patch in Grapevine, downtown Grapevine.
Yep.
And I had run into a kid that we reached for the Lord when he was in 9th grade. And it was how many years later? 14 years later. Anyway, that the server was his ex-wife, but I had seen her at the VBS, the summer children's program we had at the apartment community where she lived, but I recognized her. And so all this happened because I'm out at the Cotton Patch and she recognized me, but then she was sharing with me the story about Sam running into me in the dark in that community. One night I was visiting, telling the kids, hey, we're getting the club going. So yeah, you never know what God's going to do. Something else you shared with me is think about serving others more than making yourself something. And of course, I think even the story you just shared illustrates that, but tell me about that. How do you see that playing out in your life?
I think, and I'm trying not to be, I try not to be too critical. I sometimes get a little jaded, but there's a lot of followers of Christ who are self-seeking in addition to trying to do ministry. And when you read Philippians 2, it says specifically that Jesus emptied himself. There was nothing about him that was about him. He was about others. And I think that's more of that is what's needed because people see that. And that's what we want to be. We want to just empty ourselves and lift others up. And then however God chooses to use us or what he wants to do with us is up to him, not up to me. But I needed to quit. I have to learn to quit striving for anything for me and just allow God to be the one that raises whoever up. And that's been the greatest part of mentoring is watching the guys that I've been able to be a part of their lives in just a small way, watch them rise. I take more joy out of that than anything in the world. And so that having that perspective is helping me, and I'm working on it every day. But I also want to see it out of I want to see it out of leaders in churches too. And I see a lot of that not happening, and it's frustrating for me. But if you're going to lead something, you need to look at what the example was, and Jesus is the example, and it's right there in Philippians 2. And if you're not being that kind of person, no matter where you're leading, then you're not doing what Christ called us to do. And I think it's a check on the heart, a deep check on the heart on what your heart is standing for and who for.
Yeah, and back when Colton first came to your church and you auditioned him, and I shared the story previously, but it needs to be said again in your presence that I was all excited and I thought, okay, he's going to get to be one of the drummers in rotation for the main worship service. And Colton came home and I said, well, how'd it go? And he said, I did a good job, but he said, I haven't gotten my groove yet. I'm like, what? And you were right, but it was a learning experience for him. It also challenged him to work harder, to where I remember then the day he came back and I said, well, how'd it go this time? And they said, you found it. I mean, we can hear the difference. And of course, being around drummers now for a lot of years, you can hear the difference, and, but you were willing to work with, how old was Colton? My wife's off the camera here. A sophomore. So he was about 16. And, keep in mind, folks, David's very modest, but he was in a very, prominent position with a lot of, responsibility, pressure as the worship leader for the church. But yet he personally was willing to give his time and invest it in a 16-year-old. And it's still paying dividends to this day. So
I got to give props to Chris Clayton though, because I told Chris Clayton, I said, listen, when you tell me Colton's ready, I'll trust you, because I was mentoring Chris at the time, and that's when Chris brought him to me. I said, Chris, you lied. He's not ready. He ain't got it yet, but he'll get there, and I'm sure Chris worked with him too. But I'm telling you, when he came back, and then to this day, I would sit down with Colton and play anything, anywhere, any place, anytime, because he's just really, I just feel like he's my brother and in crime doing this thing, and I just love him so much.
I was watching a live recording last night of Rick Beato with Nuno Betancourt, who's Beato, the musicologist, says that Betancourt now has ascended to he's taken Eddie Van Halen's place as probably the most amazing guitar player alive. Nuno's voice, I mean, his language is rough sometimes, but he was talking about some of these early drummers that he, inspired him. And he said that the thing about them that he loved, he said they weren't just, technicians. He said it's like watching them dance. And he was talking about the way that they, their arms moved and stuff. He said that, as a lead vocalist and lead guitar player, he said to be with those kind of cats, that it just inspires you, because they're doing more than just, keeping time. I mean, they're like, it's like pouring out of their entire bodies. So, but the reason why I say that is because when Colton drummed for you, I mean, he was up there just like, Garth Algar, like he's just happy as can be. So fond memories.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say that's true of I will leave out different people, but there's something different when I watch Prince play guitar, when I watch John Mayer play guitar, Stevie Ray Vaughan. There's something different. Other people can play the licks, but there's something different that comes out of that guitar than comes out of other people. And it's like you said, it's something that's it's just transcendent above just playing technically what you're supposed to play.
Well, and you being an amazing musician in a lot of categories, what do you think? Because you have that, and amazing songwriter, and we get up and we go into one of the worship songs you've written. There's this energy, and some of the people you mentioned, I don't know necessarily where they walk with God or not, but it's something real. It's palatable. What do you have any insight? I mean, how does that giftedness?
I watched somebody, I can't remember who it was, but they said if you love it, if it moves you as a person, the person playing the music, if it moves you, it's definitely going to move someone else. And so that's what I've really tried to do. I want to write music that comes from my heart, number one, especially worship music that I'm able to pour my heart out to the Lord. And then hopefully that gives voice to someone else to be able to maybe say something they wouldn't have thought to say a certain way. And now they've got a voice and a vocabulary to say that with. And that's what I always say when we're writing worship songs, we're just increasing the vocabulary of people to be able to communicate and commune with God through song. And in turn, he transforms our heart as those words come out of our mouths. He does things that are larger than we can ask for or imagine. And that's really what my heart is as a worship leader, to allow that opportunity to happen, that encounter.
Now, where you are presently in life, would you say, or in songwriting, does it continue to just come out of you? In other words, if something happens, you're going, wait, I got to write that down. Are you still pursuing songwriting? How does that blend into your personality, into yourself at this point? Because you've been prolific, but you know what I mean? Are you one of those guys that carries a pad and it's like, oh wait, write that down?
No, I have to be a little more intentional sometimes. Sometimes things come, but I really have to be intentional, because really one of my probably the top thing I love to do right now is scoring. And the reason I like that is because I've always loved music more than lyrics. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I could sit and just listen to music. But scoring is a way to do what I just said with words, to do it with music, to where you feel what I'm hoping you'll feel. And just in the last few years, I've done a lot of it. And I really love that emotion of maybe a melodic line of a certain build in a song, or a finish, or the way you arrange the brass and the way it plays off a string thing or a woodwind thing, and you put those things together, and then you also adding video to it in a way, whether it's for a movie, or whether it's for a short film, or whether it's just something you're doing as an entry to a service. That those two things combined, that's another kind of magic that I really, really enjoy.
Now, when you say that, someone that comes to mind that individually he is a really different person, but Danny Elfman.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And it's just shocking because, he was the lead frontman for not a punk band, but anyway, Oingo Boingo, which was very, avant-garde and kind of silly. But then he's just this amazing film scorer. And I've watched some of the videos of him showing how he does it. And, of course, he's amazing. He did a lot of stuff for Tim Burton. But so do you follow him at all, or are you aware of him?
Yeah, I mean, I follow all those guys. And John Williams, obviously, coming from my era, been in the early 80s, in the 80s, or 70s and 80s. When I listen to the Olympic theme to this day that he wrote, I want to jump up and, run around a track or something. And if I did that, I would die. So to have the music move me that much, that's pretty good.
Well, yeah. So John Williams, I guess he just received some sort of huge award. But talk about amazing.
Yeah.
Are you interested in doing anything like that? Some film
Absolutely.
scoring?
Absolutely. I'm talking to some companies right now about doing some scoring for some of their promo stuff, and so it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I can tell you will do an excellent job at it and be very successful. A song that I think has a lot of depth in it, the song "Here" from your album. I think it needs to be recorded by somebody here in Nashville. And I know right now there seems to be a strong aversion still about doing what the industry calls outside cuts. But there was a guy here in town who is evidently pretty prominent in one of the major trade magazines. He put out the notice that, hey, this needs to change. The artist needs to start recording outside cuts. I mean, if Elvis Presley, you wouldn't know who he is. He didn't write a song.
Yep.
But Michael Bublé didn't write music to begin with. I mean, he was doing covers. Now he has stuff that his name's, co-writer on. So, yeah, I don't know what would stimulate that. Do you think, David? I mean, you've been in the industry a long time. This aversion to outside cuts. Do you have any idea on that?
I don't. Other than there are people that are gifted songwriters that aren't gifted at being in front of people, and so their talent is to put words to music in a special way. And then there's people that aren't necessarily good at writing. So I think it's being willing to drop egos and things like that to say, you know what, I'm going to take this song and benefit this person, and yes, it'll benefit me too, because this is their gift, and let me be an instrument of helping their gift get out there. And it really is a lot of laying down your own pride and your own self, and being willing to take something and really do something with it that you can do that they may not be able to do, and enjoy their success as much as you enjoy what success comes your way.
Yeah. If they can put people in the seats, that equals income, which helps pay the bills. So
100%.
Yeah. I'm praying that there's a change here in the city, because it's pretty tight that if you're not, one of the artists on the thing, that they're not recording it, and to have somebody that can interpret is powerful. I don't know. I can't remember if I sent you the link here recently. Have you heard of Tori? It's Holub, Holub.
You sent me the link. I haven't had an opportunity to listen to it yet.
Yeah. There's a guy, I think he's called Wings of Pegasus. He's got a YouTube channel to where he kind of goes through and audio tracks and the sound waves as far as giving feedback on what they've done in recording. And he did a recent YouTube, broadcast on her, but talking about when you said that, having the microphone, a good clean recording minus the gear. And he said that exact same thing, David. And then he's evaluating this Tori I guess it's Holub, who is a replica of Karen Carpenter, which
Mm.
it's eerie. And he talks about that, the fact that her voice, and so he breaks it down, and through the analysis electronically, they're not colorizing her voice. I mean, she sings like Karen Carpenter. She's 37, but somebody's going to sign her. It's just, she's amazing. And she can interpret all these songs. So I'm going, well, she's the next female Michael Bublé, you know?
Yeah, I you know, and another thing thing that's missing, at least in a lot of things I hear today. I mean, every place I go, most of the time they're playing 80s and 90s music, because they were songs they'll last. People will be listening to them forever. They're timeless. And a lot of the stuff you listen to today, I mean, it's nobody's going to remember those songs, because it's just a different kind of way of doing things. And maybe that's the way it's going. But it's just funny that every restaurant I go to, every place I go, I'm still hearing Toto, Sting, Prince. I'm hearing all their individual songs that are the best. U2. I mean, if I go to U2 concert, I just want to hear 3 songs and I'm happy. I'll go home happy. I could care less about the rest of it. So a great song can never be replaced, and so it's worth spending the time to craft a good song with a great melody, with great lyrics, and something that comes from the heart, that speaks to the soul of a person.
Yeah. You know, Susan's aunt, we found out she had a long lost aunt that she didn't know existed. And she lives right near Paisley Park, Prince's studios.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And all the years never knew that he lived there. You know, he was there in the community, and he just was very kind of a quiet individual. But I just, you know, it was after he passed away. But she said, I didn't know that was it. I used to drive by it all the time, and I thought it was an industrial complex. But,
it looked like one.
Yeah. Did you know, this is a little known fact, that he would open up his 10,000 square foot soundstage, and on Friday night you could buy tickets. You had to buy them locally from his people, and go sit in there, and he'd show up, and it's like, hey, I got a new guitar, I want to show you guys. And I thought, can you imagine? It didn't go through Ticketmaster or anyone. $10 at the door. Totally unlike what I pictured this cat to be.
I actually did know that, because I really enjoy some of his music, and he was that kind of guy, because he really loved music. I mean, that was his outlet to some of the things he had when he was growing up, that got him out of the funk that he was in. And I think he just loved sharing what he had been gifted with others. And that was one way he could do it, was Friday night, y'all come out. And I've actually watched some videos of that, of them just jamming. And it's so much fun to watch. It's exciting.
You know, some guys that were showing up to do some recording with him, they were sitting there waiting, and there was this kid over there, you know, messing around, playing all the instruments. And so they said, well, when's Prince going to get here? They didn't know who he was at the time. And they said, well, it's that guy over here. Like, you know, because he could play everything. And it's like, yeah. Oh, okay. I tell you, yeah, I think he and I and Michael Jackson, we were all the same age. He would be, you know, different days, but I tell you, it's been awesome to sit down and talk to you, and to tell you how much I appreciate you publicly. And we're excited to see what God is going to do in these next steps in your life. I know it's going to be impacting people individually. It's who you are. I think you're going to still continue. I'm just not prophesying into your life, but you're an amazing songmeister and mentor. And I tell you, man, if we could take that Soundtown funk and transport it into the culture, that would be huge, to have places to where people, enclaves, to people to gather. People want to hang out and be appreciated. You know,
yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, and the cheers factor, which I don't advocate going to bars, but the whole point of that show was that those people had a family there that obviously they didn't have at home, or they would have been at home. But people are starving for the attention, starving to go someplace to where everybody knows your name. And boy, if we could figure out, and you know, something that you shared that may be one of those ways is you asking the question of that person in the business, you know, if I started, or if we were part of a house church, would you be interested in coming?
Yep, absolutely. I think people are, just to sum up what you're saying, people are starving for community, real community, and they just want somebody to love them, accept them, and also I think in some ways they may not know if they want to be held accountable. It has to be a loving accountability, and that's important. And that's what we're striving for, is just to find a community that we can love on and lead to the one that we know can hold them and bring them to the place that they never thought they could be.
Well, I tell you, that's a good word to wrap up on. So let this be an encouragement to all of us. We're all concerned about the condition of our planet, but it really starts with us as individuals and being salt and light.
That's right.
Christians, and of opening our lives to others to foster a community that people, literally some are dying for. And so with that, okay, before we finish up, we have to talk about this. Sorry. I mean, this is okay. This is, we roll this way. But my wife held up the sign and said, ask him about NYPD Deli, because Chris Clayton's talked about it. Will Denton's talked about it, but you in invoking this in the people's lives have put down my Dr. Bell, my key theological professor, used to call it I don't know where he got the term from. I think he made it up. It called a boodak, that something sticks in your head that you can't get out. So before we go, and you'll have the last word. So tell me about NYPD Deli in Euless, Texas.
Okay, so Soundtown was there was a church that had some space right across the street from where this deli was, that allowed us to have some space to do Soundtown Studios at the time, because they just weren't using it, and it was already kind of designed out like a studio in a way. We just did some improvements on it. But this was my way of hooking all these turkeys into doing stuff for me. I take them over to NYPD. It's this deli, and it is a complete dive. But they have this one sandwich. It's called the Sopranos Hero Sandwich. And there's not one guitar player that ever came through my studio, one bass player that ever came through our studio, keyboard player, drummer, singer, anybody that doesn't love that sandwich. So all I had to do was take them over there. They come back anytime I asked them, as long as I promised to take them to NYPD to get the Soprano Hero Italian sandwich.
The Soprano. Well, now I'm going to. Oh, okay. So I think it's still open, David. So
it's still open. We go every now and again to grab one.
And they're still doing the Soprano.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so my wife's going home to her father's 95th birthday coming up at the end of March. So she's going to go to NYPD. I know where it is. It's on
there many times, but never went in.
Been by there many times.
There's a guitar player, Stephen Lewicki, who lives in Nashville. He would come, and the first thing he would ask me, when are we going to lunch? I mean, it'd be like 9:30 in the morning. When are we going to lunch? I'm like, you got to hold on, brother. You don't get your sandwich until I hear the licks, and then we can go.
Well, so we may have a little bit of an inside scoop on how we see that community to develop, have really good sandwiches.
Yeah, you gotta have the food. You gotta bring it.
Well, I tell you, thank you so much for joining in with us today. Thank you so much, David, for being with us. And with that, we bid you peace.